I never planned for anything unusual to happen that night. I went to the party because I felt like I needed a break from routine, from silence, from a relationship that had slowly become a quiet room with no door to escape through. My partner had barely looked up from their work when I mentioned the invitation. They just nodded, distracted, as if my presence in the room carried the same weight as background noise. I told myself it didn't bother me, but walking down the street toward the rooftop event, I realized how heavy that feeling had become. I wasn't running from them. I was running from the version of myself I'd become around them. Unseen, unheard, unnoticed, the party was already glowing when I arrived. Soft lights wrapped around the terrace railing. Music pulsed gently through the air, and clusters of people stood talking in little islands of laughter and drinks. I slipped into the crowd easily. Faceless gatherings have a way of absorbing you without asking who you are or what you feel. For a while, I wandered from corner to corner, exchanging quick smiles, nodding to people I barely recognized. But even in the middle of loud music and warm conversation, the loneliness stayed close, resting on my shoulder like an old companion that I must have looked distracted, maybe even lost, because that's when the two men approached me. They didn't push their presence into my space. It was the opposite. They walked up calmly, as if checking on someone sitting alone at the edge of the dance floor. One of them asked if I was okay. Not in a dramatic way, not with heavy concern, but with a quiet kind of sincerity that made me pause. I told them I was fine, though I knew the word didn't fit how I actually felt. They exchanged a small glance, the kind that people share when they can read what you're not saying. The conversation started lightly. Names, how he knew the host, harmless questions. But there's something about the way they listened, really listened, that made each minute feel strangely grounding. Their voices were soft, their energy warm, as if they understood the difference between being friendly and being present. I wasn't attracted to them in any sudden, overwhelming way. It wasn't like that. It was more subtle, the feeling of being acknowledged after so long. One of them made a gentle comment, something like, "You look like someone with a lot on your mind." And for a moment, I felt exposed, not in a vulnerable way, but in a way that made me realize how long it had been since anyone tried to see past my surface. I brushed it off with a small laugh, though inside the words had landed deeper than I wanted to admit. We talked for a while, slipping into a conversation that felt oddly natural. They weren't flirtatious or pushy. They didn't try to dominate the moment. They simply stayed with me in the space I occupied, quiet, thoughtful, halfway between wanting company and wanting to disappear. Something in their presence softened the noise of the party, as if the world around us dimmed a little. After some time, one of them suggested finding a quieter place to talk. The music had grown louder, and the crowd was swelling with new arrivals. I hesitated immediately, not because I feared them, but because I feared myself. I thought of my partner, their distant eyes, their distracted voice, the feeling of standing in the same room with them but being miles away. Going somewhere quieter with two strangers felt like a small decision that carried a heavy shadow. But the men didn't rush me. They didn't insist. They simply offered the idea and waited. That patience made something inside me relax. I agreed, not from excitement, but from a quiet desire for a moment where I didn't feel invisible. They led me upstairs to a guest room, leaving the noise far behind. The room was warm and softly lit, the kind of space that made you feel safe without saying a word. They made sure I was comfortable, made sure I knew the door wasn't locked, and that I could walk out any time. Their respect was the first thing I noticed. The silence between us wasn't heavy or suggestive. It was gentle, waiting, open, but somewhere inside me, a small thought stirred. What am I doing here, and why does this feel like the first moment all night where I can breathe? The quiet of the room settled around us like a warm blanket, soft and steady compared to the noise we had left behind. I sat at the edge of the sofa, unsure of what I was supposed to feel. The two men didn't crowd me or sit too close. One leaned against the far wall, the other took a seat across from me. Their distance felt intentional, like they wanted to make sure I didn't mistake their presence for pressure. It was strange how safe that made me feel, safer than I had felt in my own home for months. One of them asked again, gently, if I was all right. I could have lied. I almost did. But something about the quiet, something about the way they looked at me without expectation, made the truth slip out before I could catch it. I told them I'd been struggling. Not dramatically, not in a way that demanded sympathy. Just struggling. Feeling unseen, unheard, fading a little more each day into the background of my own relationship. They listened without interrupting, without offering solutions or acting as though they understood everything. They listened the way people do when they actually care about the answer. It felt strange, almost unfamiliar, and yet comforting. As I talked, the words came out in pieces I didn't even realize I'd been holding. I told them about the silence at home, about feeling like a warm body next to someone who didn't know how to look at me anymore. I wasn't blaming my partner. I wasn't blaming myself. I was just tired of being the only one trying to fix something neither of us could name. They nodded slowly, absorbing each word. One of them said softly, "You don't sound like someone who wants to leave. You sound like someone who wants to be understood." His voice wasn't flirtatious. It wasn't suggestive. It was the kind of voice that reaches the thoughts you keep buried. Another added, "Everyone deserves to feel chosen." The sentence hit me harder than I expected, not because it was romantic, but because it was true. There was a moment of silence after that, long enough for me to feel the weight of his words. I shifted on the sofa, staring at my hands, unsure of what I was supposed to do with the emotions rising in my chest. I didn't come upstairs to seek comfort. I didn't come looking for temptation. But the ache I felt wasn't desire. It was the fear of recognizing how deeply lonely I had become. One of them noticed the way my shoulders tightened and asked if I felt uncomfortable. I said no, but my voice betrayed me. They reassured me again that I didn't owe them anything, that I could walk out, that the door was open, that the moment didn't have to be anything more than a conversation. That reassurance didn't push me away. It rooted me more firmly in the room, that I found myself telling them things I had never said out loud. How I used to feel when my partner looked at me with admiration, how things slowly changed without either of us noticing, how I wasn't sure if the distance between us was temporary or permanent. The men didn't offer judgment. They didn't suggest blame. They simply reflected back that my feelings were real and allowed to exist. At one point, one of them stepped closer, not close enough to invade my space, just close enough to hand me a glass of water. When he did, his fingers brushed mine for a second. It wasn't a deliberate touch. It wasn't intimate, but it startled me. Not because of attraction, but because it had been a long time since someone interacted with me with such gentleness. The rush of guilt hit me, the kind that makes your throat tighten. I pulled my hand back quickly and whispered, "I feel like I shouldn't be here." They didn't exchange predatory looks or encourage anything. Instead, they both softened. One said quietly, "You don't owe us a moment that hurts your heart." The other added, "We're not here to complicate your life. You can leave anytime." Their kindness unsettled me more than anything else, because it made the loneliness inside me even more obvious. I wasn't drawn to them physically. I wasn't falling for them. I was drawn to the fact that for the first time in months, someone was paying attention. Not to my body, not to my actions, but to the emotions trembling beneath the surface. That I stayed seated, even though part of me felt like I should have stood up and walked out. The room didn't feel dangerous. It felt honest. And honesty, in that moment, was the most dangerous thing of all. When I finally lifted my head, the silence between us wasn't empty. It was waiting, not for a decision I wasn't ready to make, but for the truth I had been avoiding. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The room was too quiet, the kind of quiet that gently pulls at the inside of your chest and makes you confront things you've been trying to ignore. I felt the weight of their attention on me, not heavy, not demanding, just present in a way that made it impossible to hide behind the usual excuses. I stare at my hands resting loosely on my lap, realizing how tightly I've been holding myself together these past weeks, maybe months, without even noticing that my friend shifted slightly beside me. The cushion dipped with the movement, not enough to touch, but enough for the warmth of his presence to reach me again. "You always try to stay strong for everyone else," he said softly. "But sometimes you need someone to be strong for you." His words landed deeper than either of us expected. I closed my eyes briefly, letting that truth pass through me. It felt both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because it was what I desperately needed. Terrifying because I wasn't sure who I was becoming by needing it. The older brother stood up from his chair and walked toward the opposite side of the room, not stepping too close this time. He leaned against the wall, arms folded loosely again, his posture quiet and thoughtful. "It's okay to feel lost," he said, "but don't let that feeling guide you somewhere you'll regret." Something in his tone, steady, calm, almost protective, brought a subtle sting behind my eyes. I blinked it away quickly, hoping they didn't notice, though I suspected they did. They seemed to notice everything tonight. "You're not doing anything wrong," my friend added gently. "You're just tired of carrying everything alone." But deep inside, I knew the truth was more complicated. I wasn't doing anything wrong yet, but the boundary between comfort and temptation was blurring, softening, becoming almost impossible to distinguish. And if I wasn't careful, comfort could turn into something else, something that might feel good in the moment but echo with guilt afterward. The room felt smaller again, but in a different way this time. Not tense, not charged, just intimate, honest human. I took a slow breath and finally found the courage to speak. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore," I admitted. "I don't want to hurt anyone. I don't want to betray anyone. But I don't feel like myself. And tonight, being here with both of you, it made me realize how lonely I've been." It was the closest I had come to confessing the emotional pull forming inside me. A pull I didn't fully understand, but couldn't pretend wasn't there. My friend lowered his gaze, nodding slowly. The older brother exhaled quietly, shifting his weight but remaining where he stood, giving me space. For the first time that night, I felt the room breathe with me instead of tightening around me. "You don't owe us anything," the older brother said after a moment. "But you owe yourself honesty." He wasn't scolding me. His voice held no disappointment, only clarity, the kind that gently but firmly places a mirror in your hands. My friend reached out, not to take my hand, but to rest his own against the cushion between us, close enough that it felt like reassurance without crossing a line. "We care about you. That's all," he whispered. "We don't want to make things harder." And strangely, that simple statement, care without demand, unlocked everything I had been avoiding. I stood up slowly, my legs stiff from sitting too long in tension. Both brothers watched me quietly. My friend rose too, as if ready to help if I stumbled. I didn't. I just took a steady breath and looked at the barely illuminated room, the shelves, the memories, the closeness we'd shared tonight. "This, whatever it is, it can't become something I regret," I said, my voice low but firm. They both understood. I could see it in the way their shoulders relaxed, in the way neither tried to stop me. The older brother gave a small, reassuring nod. "Then choose the version of yourself you want to live with tomorrow." My friend walked me to the door. We didn't hug. We didn't touch. He simply opened the door for me, the hallway light casting soft shadows across the floor. "If you ever need someone to talk to," he said, "we're here. But take care of your heart first." I stepped out into the cool night air, breathing deeply, feeling the weight in my chest loosen. Not gone, but clearer. I didn't have answers yet, but I had direction. When I finally reached home later that night, I paused before unlocking the door. I realized I needed to stop hiding from the conversations I had been avoiding. I needed to speak honestly to myself and to the person waiting inside, because infidelity doesn't always begin with actions. Sometimes it starts with silence. And I wasn't going to let tonight become a silence I regretted. The door clicked open softly, and for the first time in a long time, I stepped inside determined not to run from myself anymore.